From beyond the stars comes a hero to save the day. That's right, it's elemental hero Neos. But I don't really want to talk about him because while he's a pretty cool concept, I'm much more fascinated by the Neo-Spacians. The deck type as a whole is pretty cool, though just not that good. The point of this archetype is to use elemental hero Neos alongside any of the 6 Neo-Spacians, and contact fuse them into any of the corresponding fusion monsters. No, also you need Neo-Space on the field, otherwise they warp back to the extra deck during the end phase. While there's been more support in the years since, I want to take a look at some of the direct support for the Neo-Spacians. What can they do without the big guy? Well, not all that much. There are 2 fusion monsters that are part of a mechanic that was really not explored all that much, and I kind of wish it was. So the Neo-Spacian monsters are all different species of aliens that still fall into a superhero theme. They haven't been all that useful over the course of the game. Neo-Spacian Aqua Dolphin allows you to discard a card from your hand, then look at your opponent's hand and discard a monster from there with less attack than a monster you control and then burn them for 500. If you can't, then you take the damage instead. While not too impressive at first, it actually became good later on, because it could be searched out with Neo-Space Connector, look at your opponent's hand to gain some knowledge as well as potentially get rid of a hand trap, then immediately link off into the link monster I sold. Neo-Spacian Air Hummingbird once per turn lets you gain 500 life points for each card in your opponent's hand. This has been a weird tech card in decks to gain some extra life if a game goes into time.
Neo-Spacian Flare Scarab gains attack for spells and traps that your opponent controls.
Neo-Spacian Grandma can return itself and a monster it battles to the hand before the damage step and was the best by far, seeing a lot of play during this era and beyond in Yu-Gi-Oh! Neo-Spacian Glowmoss is not very good. When it battles a monster, your opponent draws a card and depending on the card drawn, will either end the battle phase, change to a direct attack, or change battle position. Interesting, but giving your opponent even one extra card is never a good idea. Lastly, Neo-Spacian Dark Panther can once per turn copy an opponent's monster effect, which could come in handy in weird cases. The point is that these guys just don't work all that well on their own. They really do need Neos in order to fuse into bigger monsters with basically the same effects, just upgraded. Also having 2500 attack can seal the deal. Despite these being some really cool designs, they're attached to some weenies. But we can actually go a step below weenie, that is, baby. Yeah, each monster has a chrysalis form. They're all level 2 monsters that have an effect to tribute themselves and summon the corresponding Neo-Spacian monster from the deck, as long as you control the Neo-Space field spell. I mean, I guess it makes for some interesting lore. Like, all these aliens were weird little creatures before becoming heroes and eventually bigger heroes, but ultimately they just sort of serve as extra copies of the originals. So let's give the chrysalis monsters even more support. That's right, in an archetype offshoot of an archetype offshoot, there are 3 spells and 1 trap that admittedly make them somewhat playable. I'm not saying that a deck full of chrysalis monsters and Neo-Spacians only would be good. I'm just saying that it would be able to summon a decent amount of Neo-Spacians pretty consistently. Contact allows you to trigger the special summoning from the deck effect without needing Neospace. Cocoon Party summons 1 chrysalis monster from your deck for each Neo-Spacian with a different name in your graveyard. Cocoon Rebirth lets you tribute a chrysalis monster to summon the corresponding Neo-Spacian from the graveyard. And Cocoon Veil has you tribute a chrysalis in order to take 0 effect damage for the turn. Oh, also you special summon the corresponding Neo-Spacian monster from either graveyard. And I just want to say that these card effects have the term written in the card text, which is funny because I would always laugh at cards that use the term mentions like we see more recently with Fallen of Albaz and Adventure Token. Again, these chrysalis cards aren't great, but they really make me think. If you're playing a full Neos deck that uses the fusion monsters, all these cards would just get in the way, but Cocoon Party being able to summon a bunch of little guys from the deck really gets me kinda curious, especially because it can combo with Cocoon Rebirth. The issue is that the payoff isn't all that great. So what we really need to do is go beyond. NEX! Truly a one-of-a-kind spell card. You send 1 face-up Neo-Spacian monster you control to the graveyard in order to summon 1 level 4 monster with the same name from your extra deck. Ah, I see, that's the key to making a pure Neo-Spacian deck work. Finally, I can summon 2 monsters? Yeah, unfortunately we only ever got 2 NEX Fusion Monsters, which is really a shame because hypothetically they could have been what sets these guys apart from Neos, and allows them to do something great. I mean, the card artwork literally has all 6 of them on it. It's not like you forgot that there were 6 Neo-Spacians. The concept is so interesting, it reminds me of Metamorphosis, but more thematic. Anyway, the first of the bunch is Neo-Spacian Marine Dolphin, which has the same effect as Aqua Dolphin, except you don't take 500 damage if you whiff the effect. And as you would expect, the attack and defense aren't all that great. It really should have been higher. I mean, it's a level 4 monster, nobody's gonna get hurt if you give it 1800, I'm begging you. After that we have Neo-Spacian Twinkle Moss, the upgraded form of Glow Moss, and believe it or not, this one actually fixes the effect, simply by changing it to make you be the one to draw a card. And when it comes to the stats, I think 500 attack isn't all that terrible, because it can potentially attack directly. but at least give it a bigger booty. Only 1100 defense for the last effect isn't gonna save it. Speaking of which, this is one of the many cards that was censored in the TCG. And I know what you're thinking. It's only a slime woman, how could it have been any worse? The OCG gave it a bigger chest. It's not even like exposing or anything, they're just made of goop. I say make this one the next Lost Art promotion, I think we deserve it. Weird memory with this card, but it's one that showed up quite a bit in duels with my friends and brothers as kids. One of my brothers used Neo-Spacians and of course played anything and everything to get the deck to 40 cards. You know how it is when you're young and poor and you want to play Yu-Gi-Oh? Needless to say, against a bunch of other cobbled together incoherent decks, this was actually sorta useful. Drawing a card every turn and potentially protecting itself as long as you drew a monster isn't all that bad. But that's about as far as NEX can take us. There is a Marine Dolphin exclusive NEX Fusion that is the ultimate form of the effect, but it's hardly worth the effort. The NEX Fusions themselves I think really could have been something, because then it would sort of give a bit more purpose to the Chrysalis support as well as the Neo-Spacians beyond, just combining them with Neos. And like I said, the idea of a fusion spell that isn't really a fusion spell would be so cool, but I think Konami was really just scared they'd accidentally create another metamorphosis situation, so they made the fusions honestly really underpowered. Like, these wouldn't even be all that great if they were level 4 main deck monsters. Had they been allowed to cook, I think they should have just been like level 5 or 6 monsters so they could just give them some more stat points and maybe slightly more beefed up effects. I get that the idea was to make sure they didn't overshadow the Neos fusions so there'd still be a reason to play them, but using one specific monster and one specific spell is already quite the investment. An entire deck utilizing this mechanic as its main form of key monsters would be such a great idea because that hasn't really been explored in much outside of this. And of course I just love the theming of them, they look like a Pokemon evolution line. Which starter are you gonna pick? I honestly hope that these monsters get some kind of retrain in the future and that the other Neo-Spacians are given some advanced forms. Maybe it would benefit them to take the effects in a different direction to better set them apart, though I really don't think they're on the short list of legacy support. I just find it so interesting that a unique concept like this would be tried out, not given nearly as much attention as it needed, and then completely forgotten by just about everyone. But I don't think that anything is ever completely out of the question. What really plagued the Neo-Spacians is that they're only a small part of a larger archetype and deck strategy, and they really are anime cards, in the sense that they showed up for some cool moments and new fusions, but still had to fit into the constraints of the narrative, leaving time for everything else. Also, Jaden himself had so many different parts to his deck throughout the course of the series, like every Yu-Gi-Oh protagonist, to the point where even now in the TCG, support cards will work for like 3 different archetypes at once because they were all used by Jaden. The point is that while Neo-Spacians did have a pretty cool impact in the anime and they had their time in the sun, when they really wanted to expand things for just them like the Chrysalis monsters and the NEX Fusions, they really only had time for so much. I just wanted to take some time to highlight some of the weird and wacky aliens of a Yu-Gi-Oh franchise, of which there are surprisingly many. So let me know what you think about the NEX Fusions in the comments below and if you have any ideas of where to go from here. Oh, also let me know which Neo-Spacian is your favorite. Honestly really do like Aqua Dolphin because he's, you know, the cool dolphin man, but if we're talking about the NEX Fusions, then yeah, the answer is Twinkle Moss, definitely Twinkle Moss. Anyway, this is GatorX, thank you so much for watching and I'll catch you all later.